Give me a moment. I should be recording my screen. You should be able to see my screen. Can anyone see
Yes,
it?
we are able to see your screen now. Yeah,
Great.
thanks.
Great. So yeah, thank you for having us. Really honored to be presenting to you guys. And I'm very happy, being someone in the developer community for Cardano since the beginning. And I'm very happy that there's a lot of interest coming from India, um, for Cardano, right? So innovating with Cardano, developers playground on Demeter and the X5 technologies. But before we start, let me introduce myself. My name is Clark Alesna. I'm from the Philippines. And besides working with the X5, I also am leading a team here in the Philippines for same to you guys as well, which are Web2 developers that's trying to come in and become a Cardano developer. Formerly, I was a developer at the Cardano Foundation, and in there I helped launch the developer portal, which you can find in the developers.cardano.org. And if you have any questions after this presentation, or any clarifications, or if you would like some resource, then you can reach out to me in the following channels. So let's go ahead and start, right? So in Cardano, like obviously in blockchain in general, there's like so much topics, right? In Cardano, there's like proof of stake, smart contracts, stake pools. All this stuff is so large, and admittedly, documentation right now can still be improved. Right, it's not the best still. But for me, if you would really like to develop on Cardano, the first thing you would learn should be UTXO. And this is and because UTXO is a model that originated from Bitcoin. That means that if you do learn this concept, then that means that you not only learn Cardano, but you learn like the basics of UTXO based blockchains in general, right? So, but instead of like reading to you guys like the definition of what is the UTXO, um, well, UTXO stands for unspent transaction output. It's a model for tracking cryptocurrency ownership. Um, but instead of like just maybe reading documentation to you guys, I would say I prepared here a whiteboard to just simply dig through it. It's an interactive session where I'm hoping that if there's any questions, clarifications, and really just get to know UTXO. Because again, this is like fundamental to everything that you will do in Cardano. Now here in the left, I just put here a simple visualization where I think all of us are familiar, because obviously I also come from a Web 2 background, right? When I say Web 2, it's just the typical back end. You have a database, and so let's imagine like you have a application where you track a user's points or balance. Maybe this is like a financial application, or maybe this is like a game application where you have a concept of points, right? And typically, if you do have these points, then how you could increase or decrease this value would be a simple addition or subtraction, right? So for example, in this case, maybe let's say a user one has 100 balance, and then it's the user spent 20 of the points, then you just deduct 20 to the database, and then you have a new balance, right? Let's say that the user one sent to user two, for example. So you would deduct from user one, and then you would add to user two, right? That's how. And this is a very simple model. And in fact, there are blockchains that
तभी এটা
some
পানি খাওয়ানো বলে তো বাজে গেছে
uh,
Paul, can you not mute everyone except Clark? We having everyone, please mute themselves, otherwise difficult. Sorry, Clark.
no problem. Let me know if we can proceed.
Yeah, proceed.
Yeah. So I was saying that there are even blockchains that has this similar model, which would be Ethereum, right? It uses the accounting model, although not, I'm greatly simplifying this, right? But obviously, as a developer, this point of view, this model is very simple, right? We all know this, right? Now in Cardano, it's very different, and that's why I discussed this first, because really what UTXO is just really trying to track the balance, right? Or the ownership. But in a different point of view. So in UTXO, in Cardano, in fact, Cardano uses something called EUTXO, but we'll discuss that later. But in Cardano, you know, the user has an account or a wallet, and it could be that within the blockchain, within the data of the blockchain, there are several unspent UTXOs. That means that the user has not used them yet, right? So let's just imagine that there's a wallet or a user one, and currently in the blockchain he has two UTXOs. It could be something a UTXO could look something like this: amount ADA, 100 ADA, and then the address would be some kind of address. For simplicity, we just say user one. And depending on the blockchain, then a UTXO could have different other kinds of information. And again, for Cardano, that's called the extended UTXO. But to simplify this discussion, we just simplify it to two fields: the amount and the user. So now, if we wanted to know the balance of user one, you would have to query the blockchain and look for all the unspent UTXOs of that user, and then simply you would just total that, right? So for example, if this wasn't spent yet, then the total would be 100 plus 110 would be 210 ADA, right? So simply and now if you're trying to reflect this into a user interface, then simply user one has 210 ADA, right? You would do the same for user two, and then display, total, calculate it, and display it, right? Now, if if a user has money, then one thing you could do with that money or asset is to spend that asset, right? So let's say we have an example where user one would send to user two, right? Um, to do that, simply user one would just consume this UTXO. That means, in fact, this will not be a UTXO anymore. It will be a spent transaction output, and it will generate two new UTXOs. So if, for example, in this case, user one sent 50 ADA to user two, and since he had 100 ADA in this UTXO, then he has to one of the rules, something called the ledger rules, would be to return or send that somewhere else. Because it needs to be balanced, right? The transaction has to be balanced. So 100, and if you total this 50 plus 50, then that accounts for the 100 ADA. Obviously, I'm greatly simplifying this because in the real world there are fees, but for simplicity, let's ignore fees for now. So that's it, right? And now, if we wanted to again total the balance for user one, simply we will retrieve all the unspent transactions. So here and here, and then we total it, and now we can say, okay, user one has 160 ADA. And now for user two, if we total it, suddenly user two's balance has increased, right? And it's now 100 ADA. So really, it's UTXO is kind of simple in a way, but also in a from a perspective of a web to from web to perspective, because that was also my perspective at first, might look like unnecessary, right? Actually, it has a lot of advantages like parallelism, where the user could spend both of these together for different purposes in parallel, right, at the same time. So, but we'll not dig into that. So hopefully this does give you some idea on how UTXO. One thing to note here that is that in this UTXO model is that the only user that can spend this is obviously the user, the owner, where the field address is specifying the wallet address, right? And the ownership of a wallet address can then be cryptographically verified via its signing keys, right? So that's how we can maintain that no one else can steal the assets from someone else, right? Because it's mathematically secured by the keys. So that is UTXO. Um, Let me know if you guys do have questions. Otherwise, I'll continue. So that is UTXO, right? So now, so now, now your question might be, okay, that's great, Clark. That's good to know. But how do we get started? How do we interact with Cardano, right? Well, the most basic thing you could do is to then set up something called the Cardano CLI and the Cardano node, right? Which really means that you will run a software that connects to the network and downloads all the blockchain data to your machine. Now, Now, obviously, I'm saying it like it's straightforward, but really that comes with several difficulties. And the major difficulty there is that when you want to download the entire blockchain data, it tends to get very big, right? To give you an example, I will move over here to the Visual Studio Code, and I could just simply query the blockchain size right now of the mainnet Cardano that I have stored locally, and it's currently 176 gig, right? And obviously, this is not a great user experience for anyone that wants to start developing in Cardano. So just imagine you read somewhere like a Hello World tutorial, and then it takes you like 5 days before you can start because you have to wait to download it. And now that's where the Demeter and text pipe comes in, right? So Demeter is a platform that provides you all the services and a node and everything else you need so that you can interact with the Cardano network right away, immediately, right? In one sense that it's a good thing that every single person downloads the node and participates in the network. But on another layer, that if you want to accelerate your development process, then you might not want to do this right away or initially, right? So that's how Demeter can provide benefit to upcoming developers for Cardano. So Demeter provides something called the Demeter CLI that makes it very easy to interact with the Cardano network. And to show that, let me go ahead and go back to the terminal here. So before we do that, right? Let's go ahead and give you like a sample how to use the Cardano CLI first, right? So I have prepared a bunch of go here, and I have prepared a bunch of commands here. So first, a basic command would be to generate some keys, and this will be your like quote unquote wallet, so that you can receive or send ADA, right? So if you were to execute that, then it will generate two keys. So there's a signing key and a verification key, right? And using those keys, you can then generate a wallet address. So it might right now it might seem, oh no, it suddenly it's all confusing and stuff, but it's all really simple. It's just a command that generates keys, and those keys, just know that those keys is something that you can use to create an address and view your balance and then send and sign your transactions, really, right? So once you generate a address, you can view it here, and that's your address. So now, for example, once you have an address, you can even now check if it has some money inside it, right? For some ADA. So if we execute this query here. You don't have to memorize it. You can ask the resource after the presentation. So for now, let's just go through the commands. I will go ahead and query my address, and you can see here that this address has a bunch of UTXOs, right? Unspent transactions. So in fact, there's three right now, which has different amounts, right? So let's let how would you receive, for example, how would you receive some balance? Then you just pretty much simply get your wallet address, right? And for example, in Cardano, there's something called the faucet. Give me a moment here. It's here. Give me a moment. I will drag it here. So for example, there's a testnet faucet, so that in a test environment, you can ask for ADA, and you don't have to you don't have to have a hard time looking for where you can get started. So the Cardano Foundation provides this faucet. So you can request funds, and then surely enough, when you check your balance again, then you should see some UTXO into your wallet address, right? So now, how would you then send some ADA? Well, it should be very simple. Let me show you. So example for this one, right? Let us break it down real quick. So moment, let me change this to shell so it's pretty, right? So to break it down is that first you will do this. You will query your UTXOs, right? And then you will decide, okay, which UTXO would I like to use to spend, right? So I would just then I decided that okay, maybe I'll spend this amount here. So I will declare that as my input of the transaction. And then, so a UTXO would be identified by two things. So the transaction hash and then the transaction output index. pretty much. So basically, it's it's indexed within the transaction because a transaction can have multiple outputs, right? So 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth. So you just specify that and you say, okay, I will spend that, and I can spend that because I have proof that I own that, right? So now, and then you will say how much is the amount you want to send and where you would like to send it. To give you an example, right? Let's go ahead and retrieve. I will show you here. Let's go ahead and retrieve a wallet address. This is a testnet wallet address. I click the receive here. This is another wallet address, and I simply paste it here, right? And then the amount. Now, just a little bit more context is that the amount here is actually not 5 million ADA. This is just 5 ADA. And that's because in Cardano, there's really no concept of ADA. What really is inside the blockchain is something called the Lovelace, right? And a million Lovelace is equivalent to 1 ADA. So here we say, let's send 5 ADA to that address. Let me remove that for now. And then we say here that, hey, in case there are change, right, because this is a lot of ADA here, then just return it to my address here. And again, that's just a file here. This is my wallet address, right? And then we will store the transaction. And so you will find out here that a transaction is nothing more but a bunch of data with signature that's saying that I am the owner of these UTXOs, and yes, you can, and yes, I have approved this transaction, right? So and then we will store that into a file. So if we go ahead and execute that, then it even says here the estimated transaction fee is this amount, right? And then you will see this file tx.raw. And once you check that file, then you just pretty much see this kind of JSON format that, but really the important part here is the CBOR hex. In the most basic level, you really don't have to worry about this. But just to show you real quick what it really is that we will search. There's like something called a CBOR viewer because this data is something called CBOR. It's similar to JSON, but it's called concise binary object representation. So it's really just a data, and instead of like being encoded in the JSON format, it's just in binary, right? And now if you break that data down, this is just what a transaction is. And if you guys remember, we had a one input a while ago, and this is exactly the input, right? And we said that, hey, we will send 5 ADA to some address, and then this is the change of the transaction, right? This is an unsigned transaction, so it doesn't have signature information. So now, once you have the transaction data, the next thing you would do would be to sign this transaction, right? And in order to sign that, then you would use your signing key, which if you remember, you generated from the very first step, right? So let's go ahead and do that. And so I prepared obviously a command here to sign it. So we'll go ahead and do that. And we say here that, hey, once it's signed, then just generate another file called txsign. So let's do that real quick. And now if we go ahead and go back to the CBOR viewer, now we'll just notice that there's a new field here, which is like the signature, right? We don't have to dig into the details, but just know that this is now a cryptographic signature that really just simply approves that yes, you can spend this, and yes, you can send it to this address, right? And the owner of this input did approve that, right? And once you have like a signed transaction, you can go ahead and submit it to the network, right? So here we send it here, and then it just says transaction successfully submitted. So now if we go ahead now and query so let me go ahead and query the transaction. I mean the UTXO of the user. Then I think if we check, then that UTXO still exists right now. That means it's still being processed. Um, I have some logs here that will tell us that if there's a new block in the Cardano network, that's the sign that a transaction has been processed. If there's a new block that came, that potentially the transaction was included in that block. Let me try to query it again, and let's see what happens. Give me a moment here. It's still being pending, I think. Um, Give me one more time. There we go. So we see here, we see their chain extended. There was a new block, and so let's try to query it again. And there we go. So if you notice now, if we search this input now, well, there's still an input with that hash, but not the same transaction index, right? Transaction output index. This is index 0, and the reason for that is that the input that we were referring to just a while ago was already spent, and so the purpose of this command here is to query the unspent transactions, and so that since that was spent, then it doesn't return, and now we have a new output here, which it has a different transaction hash, although coincident, just the same index, but now it's a different UTXO, right? Hopefully that made sense. So if you wanted to spend it again, then you just need to build another transaction that refers to that UTXO or another UTXO, right? If we go check my wallet, the test wallet that we were sending, then we should simply see here, yeah, we did receive 5 ADA just now, right? So that means that our transaction was propagated throughout the network successfully. So that's the basic of Cardano transactions, right? You receive, you send your address to someone, and that someone potentially knows how to build transactions, or is using software that builds transactions and creates the transaction, and then when you check your balance, your UTXO, then you will see that transaction, that output come into your wallet, right? And so hopefully that's clear. I know that this is if you haven't explored this yet, this might be a very peculiar thing to think about, right? It's a new thing, but I'm sure it will make sense in time. And if you do have questions, let me know. So now we're gonna proceed with something called with the presentation. We're gonna proceed with something called oh yeah. So to explain to you that how did we interact with the network, right? So if we go back here in the query, you take so, right? You notice here that there's something called the socket path, right? And basically this is a Unix socket that Cardano CLI uses to communicate with the Cardano node, right? Now again, if you want to have a Cardano node, then that means you have to download the entire blockchain, right? Um, but because Demeter exists, instead of like waiting for days and days to download the entire blockchain, we can simply create a Demeter account and then just request that, hey, I want a node, right? So how easy or how hard is that? Well, it turns out that it's pretty easy, in fact. So you would just pretty much set up your Demeter account and then install the Demeter CLI. You will just say Demeter initialize, and then it will ask you to authenticate your account. So if you click this here, and you just accept that and all that stuff, on my side, it was already set up, so I'm not gonna do that again. And once you're connected, right, instead of like running an entire node on your side, you can just simply say Demeter ports tunnel. And when you do that, it will ask you, right now there's only one tunnel, which is the node. And then it will ask you, okay, what kind of port you want to tunnel? For now, it's only the node. Yes, I accept that. And it will tell you, it will ask you like which network would you like to interact, right? So obviously in Cardano there is mainnet, the main Cardano chain, which has value, and there are several test networks which has really no value, and its purpose is for testing, right? So there's a preview, the pre-prod, and some other testnets. For now, for this demo, we're gonna choose preview, and we've been interacting with preview, in fact, all this time. And so there's a old version of the node and a recent version of it. So Demeter actually, gives you that freedom what you prefer. It could be that you have some use case that you want to use the old node, or maybe you just want to use the latest one. So I'm gonna go ahead and
Hi, Clark, Uday here.
Mhm.
Just I was trying to unmute myself for quite some time, so now I
Sorry.
unmuted.
Yeah.
So thanks for kind of showing that we can sign up and use the Demeter. Can you
Mhm.
confirm that like the what we see on your screen, which looks like command line prompt or Visual Studio, right? Is
Yes,
it Visual Studio Code?
it,
So
it is, yes.
uh, is it kind of installed on your kind of computer or it is purely web based? I mean, I'm not getting.
Ah, yes. So that's a good question because Demeter, yeah, right. Let me go to Demeter real quick. Sorry about that. Because Demeter, if you go to Demeter, uh, there is also a web-based Visual Studio Code that you can create. It's called Workspaces, and in fact, the Workspaces provides you some templates, right? So, for example, here there's a template for a Cardano CLI tutorial. So you could choose that, and then you would have an entire Visual Studio Code in the browser with already the Cardano CLI and all the things that you would need to do the same thing that I did just now, right?
Yeah, so that everything will be available in the web basically, right? So that's the
That's
one option is there. Yeah.
that's correct. That's correct. That's a really
And the
good.
other part, what you have this downloaded, is it the typical Visual Studio we have? That's one, or we just we connect, or we need to download it from the Demeter website?
Yes, this is just your typical VS Code, right? And you would just then Demeter actually provides documentation for this. I have prepared this supposedly. Yes. So you would just then when you have your own terminal, your shell, you have Visual Studio Code, and then you would just simply download the Demeter CLI so that you can do the same thing that I did just now,
So in other
wherein
words, there's some libraries get downloaded or integrated with the client side of the Visual Studio Code, right? Is
yes,
that it?
this is just tools that you download into your machine, and then it will be you can use it within Visual Studio Code. That is correct.
And it will through my account basically it will use the server side of the node, but that from the some of the programming tools are available on my computer, but most
Um,
of the node part is on the server side kind of thing, right?
that's correct. That's correct. Only yes. What Demeter CLI provides you is just connection to the Cardano node. Really, at least for now. If you would choose this path here to download the CLI,
Yeah.
but everything else you would then have to, of course, download for yourself into your machine.
Okay, so is it, I mean, like putting in the layman kind of perspective that I can possibly download that kind of standard CLI related packages on my computer, but that will require a node creation for myself. But if I download the CLI related package from the Demeter, it
Mhm.
comes inbuilt some of the integration with the node.
That's correct. That's correct. It will give you some integration to the Demeter server so that you will have access to the Cardano node without downloading the entire blockchain for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, great. Clear to me, and hopefully this question is helping the programmers here as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I can
Those are great
understand it
questions.
is a little different, so it's not that easy to follow, but yes, please carry on.
Yes. Well, those are great questions. I really do appreciate you asking those questions. Let me try to explain further, and hopefully it will make sense in the end. So, if you guys remember, I did a Demeter ports tunnel. We choose some network, right? And then I will just specify here where I would like to save the Unix socket, right? So I will want to save that to something called Demeter preview dot socket. So this path here is temp Demeter preview socket. And so if I enter that, then suddenly just instantly after you register and set up this, then you suddenly have a Cardano node already in your machine. And you simply copy that and within the for example, if we go back to the Cardano CLI, we just replace this. This was supposed to be your node that you run on your own, but you can replace that with a Demeter connection instead, the Unix socket, right? And so if I and that means that I can just pretty much do the same, but instead via Demeter. So I go ahead and do that, and you can see that there are connections that's happening here, and it just simply gives the same result, right? Because obviously this is the same network. This is the preview Cardano network, right? Just to give you some example that if you make a mistake with that and execute that, then it will say, hey, I can't seem to connect to that node, right? So yeah, that's pretty much that pretty much gives you, what Demeter gives you in terms of advantages in your development experience within Cardano. So that leads me to the next point, which again was supposed to be Demeter CLI, and we already did that. Hopefully that made sense. But so far, what we did was like very, very basic transactions. We were just sending ADA and then receiving ADA, right? Now, obviously, if you wanted to make products on top of Cardano, then you would need some kind of logic. So, for example, that hey, you cannot get this money unless you guess this number, like a lottery program, for example, right? Or yeah, a dex, right? You want to swap assets. So the rule, for example, is that you have to give some assets first, and then so that the contract will give you some assets back, right? Something like that. Create games, all this kind of logic that you typically do. But so far we haven't shown that, because what we've shown so far was just really sending payments. So how can you do that? Well, Cardano has this concept of Cardano smart contracts, right? And specifically, we're gonna be using the Icon uh, smart contract language, and that's because it actually came from the TX5 team, and now it has seen some great adoption within the community, and in fact, Cardano Foundation itself has been helping funding the team to further along this. So so I will not, this the scope of this session is to not learn Cardano smart contracts in full, but just to give you an idea what it looks like, right? So
Yeah.
here,
Uh, Clark,
yeah,
just quickly adding here for the audience that
mhm.
see the primarily or originally maybe we can say the Plutus and Haskells are the two programming languages used for smart contract in Cardano. However, the
That's
TX pipe has come to in because Plutus and Haskell are a bit difficult to program. TX5 has come with another language called Icon. So it is kind of the language developed by TX5. And this is supposed to be more simpler than Plutus and Haskell. And it does the job. And as Clark said, that it's picking up good adoption as well. I have seen myself, various other companies started using Icon. Back to you,
that's
Clark.
that's correct. That's a very good point. And in fact, I just remembered that maybe this is interesting to show that what a Haskell smart contract looks like, right? So something like this. And so if you come from, and obviously now, if you come from like a C sharp background, a JavaScript background, or a Java background, then this might not be something that is preferable, because this is functional and the tools here are way different. This is Haskell, and within Haskell, there's a embedded language called Bluetooth. So, or Bluetooth TX. So, and you would have to deal with that. And so, what the community has noticed that this creates a lot of friction to introduce this concept to new developers. So, and that's how Icon was born, from the TX5 team, and Casey and Lucas, that they noticed that of this friction, and thought about creating a new language which supposedly makes it easier to develop on Cardano, right? And so again, this will not cover like the fundamentals of Cardano smart contract, but instead to give you an idea how it could work, right? So let's start there. Well, what we can see here is that we created, obviously you have to download Icon, and it will be as simple, once you download it, it will be as simple as Icon new, something, your project name, right? And once you have that, then you can just start typing away your contract, right? This contract is a very, very simple contract, which really requires the user to just know the number, a certain number, and if the user will know that certain number, then it will be allowed to take the assets that's in the smart contract. To illustrate that really quick is that, for example, there's a so a Cardano smart contract is really just a wallet that has a logic, right? It's a wallet, it's called a validator, right? And it also has an address, and people can send assets to that address, right? So just imagine there's a UTXO into that address, and instead of just like the basic amount, and then obviously the validator address, right? There's also some other information, and that's where the E comes from in the EU TXO. It's because it has been extended, right? And one of the new fields in the EU TXO, or what has been added, is something called the datum, and pretty much the user also decides what to put in the datum. So let's just imagine that this is like a very simple contract that if you know what's inside this datum, then you will get this ADA here. So let's say that inside the datum there's a number called 42, for example, right? And so if you know that number that is 42, then you will get 50 ADA as the reward for knowing that. That's a very simple smart contract, right? So so here that's pretty much what the code here. You can see that there's a data type, hello data, and there's a number there. And then a Cardano smart contract, a spending validator, just accepts three parameters, which is some data, the datum, and then some other data called the redeemer, and then the script context, which contains information about the transaction. And in this function, it simply just compares that if the datum and the redeemer is the same, right? There's some unit test here that we try. So we just say that, hey, the data is 42, and then we will say, we will pass 42 as the datum, and we will pass 42 as the redeemer. There is like an empty context just because this is just a test. And with that, then it should pass, right? So we can test that by doing this. We will go to hello, and it will say, I can check, for example, and the test has passed, basically. Now, it might not really make sense for now, but just let me know, right? Um, but so what it really is doing is that when a user, right, tries to consume, because this is a UTXO, right? This is a UTXO, right? So when a user, so any user can consume this UTXO. And the reason why, if you remember, the only, you know, entity that can consume UTXOs is the owner of the address, right? But in this case, since this is a validator, as long as you satisfy the condition of that validator, then anyone can consume this UTXO, right? So what would you do if you were that user that wanted to get this 50 ADA? Well, you just say, create a transaction, and the transaction will consume the UTXO. So let's say the hash and the index, right? And then you will provide something called a redeemer. And in Web 2, this would be something similar to like an endpoint, um, or an action or a parameter in the endpoint, right, of the function. So it could be a combination of endpoint plus parameter, or just simply a parameter, right? So in your parameter, you just then say, hey, my parameter is 42, and then you will submit the transaction to the node, right? So let's say submit. And once you submit that, then the validation executes. And if you guys remember that simply the validation just says, hey, if the datum is 42, which someone else set that, right? Maybe the owner of the project, hey, I will lock 50 ADA here, guess the number, right? Guess that number. So someone else set that up, and now you found out that it's 42, so you also send another transaction to consume that UTXO, right? And so that validation then proceeds, and if the validation is true, then you've successfully consumed this UTXO and generated a new UTXO. But then the difference now is that it will say, amount is 50 ADA, and instead the wallet address is now, let's say, user one, right? It just created a new UTXO that redirected that money to another wallet, really, right? So that's how simple it is. So let's do that real quick in the CLI, how we can do that, right? So if you guys remember, we created a project, a smart contract. So we will just need to compile that, right? So we just say, sorry, I can build here, and it's now compiled. It will generate a blueprint, which is basically just like the definition, right, of the contract along with the actual bytes of the contract, right? So the actual contract is just these bytes, but there's a standard for blueprints so that other applications can see what is the shape of that contract, right? Because otherwise, if it is just like this, then you will not know what's inside this contract. So it generates a blueprint to give you some idea, right? You will then be able to convert that into uh, something called a Plutus envelope in Cardano CLI, which is what the Cardano CLI understands really here. So you will execute that um, command there. If you execute that, it will generate this file here, hello.bluetooth. And from that, then you can start, uh, and then now you can just say, hey, that smart contract, I want to know the address for that smart contract. If you remember, we built an address from our keys above here. So the validator, the contract will also have its own address, and we can do the same. We can generate its address, right? And so this is now the address of that contract. And now, since that contract has an address, so the same way we can query a normal address, we can also query the contract's address. So we can try that right now. Oh, give me a moment here. What was the missing part? Oh, that's because we're not in the correct folder. So let me try that again. And so after a while, then we see that, oh, the contract already has some amount because I was testing a while ago, right? So now let's go ahead and try to send some asset or what I call lock assets to the contract, right? So so since I'm the one who will be locking some assets, then I will be spending my own UTXO. And if you guys remember, to spend your UTXO, you would have to check your UTXOs first. So let me check my UTXO again. And again, we're using the Demeter connection here to interact with the node. I will choose this UTXO here. And then I will say, okay, I will spend this UTXO. What is the index? It is index 1 here, right? And then where would you like to send that? Well, I would like to send that in the validator address, the smart contract address, right? And then what is the amount that you want to lock there? Well, I only want to lock 5 ADA for now. And whoever will guess the number, then he will get that 5 ADA as a reward, right? So there is something called the Plutus data JSON here, which is, if you guys remember, the if you guys remember here, the datum is hello data, right? Now in the smart contract layer, it might be simple, but in the outside world, it has some conversion that needs to happen, and this is how the Plutus data looks like in JSON, pretty much. So we can see here that there's a field 42 which represents this field here, and then or I mean field int, and then the value I put here is 42, right? So if we go back now to the to the command, is that we say, okay, the datum for this output is this file right here, right? Which again contains the datum date, the data that is supposed to match this parameter here. So now we're gonna go ahead and build this transaction here, assuming everything is correct. Let's do that. And it will say, hey, there's a fee. If you guys notice, I'm using another socket path here. Let's replace that with, again, the Demeter socket path here. Where was that? Here we go. And then we can build that again. And it's just the same. And remember that the transaction is just really some raw data here, and then we need to sign it the same, right? So we're gonna go ahead and sign it, and once it's signed, we will go ahead and submit it to the network. And it is submitted now. Now, since it is submitted, let's check again the contract if it received it. So right now it hasn't received it yet. So because in blockchains you have to wait for blocks to come in, right? To be minted. Let's check. Oh, looks like there's a new one just now. Let's check it one more time, maybe. There we go. So if you scroll up here, right, there's only one, and then after a while you check it again. There's two now, right? And obviously in your applications you would have to consider that where you wait for new blocks to come in and to refresh your database, for example. So now we can see here that there's 5 ADA again that we can unlock here, and this is the actual data that we put. You can see it here. So this is not a good example, obviously, because people can just see the number, but this is again for educational purposes, not for practical purposes. So now what would you do to unlock it, right? there's a little bit of detail here that I won't discuss. For example, there's something called the collateral and the spending reference. For example, the spending reference is just a reference to the contract that will execute, the one that we created a while ago, but I will not discuss it for now because for the interest of time, right? But now simply we just say, hey, I want now to get that I want to get that for me, for myself, right? So I will say, hey, I will consume that UTXO, even though this is not mine. Since this is a validator UTXO, I just need to make it so that it's a valid transaction that this validator will accept. And again, if you check the logic, we just need to provide the correct number for it to validate. And if it does, then we can unlock that asset, right? So we just say, hey, I want to unlock this asset as the input. And then what's the index? 0. We put up there. Just ignore this for now, but just know it's related to referencing the smart contract and something called the collateral. But the important part here is something like this, spending reference TX in redeemer file. So if you remember, if we go to the contract, right, there's something called the redeemer and you need to provide that, right? What is your endpoint? What is the, yes, what is the parameter that you want to pass for this validation to happen, right? So if we go back here, we will, and we check that again, it's the same, that is the exact same data. So obviously it should validate, right, the 42. So we go back there now, and let's just recheck everything. Yep, and then we say here, so for everything that we unlock, just send it to this address, the change address, right? So we go ahead and execute that. It's calculating, and it seems like it's correct. We do notice here there's an increase in fees. If we go back up here just real quick, before that, we will see that the fees was 166,000 here, and then suddenly it increased to 173 here. That's because when you execute logic in the blockchain, that costs computation to the nodes, and obviously, you have to pay for that computation somehow. So that's why the increase of fees. So now, we just go ahead and sign the transaction and submit the transaction. And once it's submitted, we just wait for another block here again. So we can go ahead and query this, in fact. So if we query this, it's still there because there's no new blocks yet. So let's wait for a little bit. Yeah, blocks in Cardano is every 20 seconds on average. So any moment now, there should be a new block. Although this is a test network, so this is not the optimal version of Cardano. But let's wait for a bit here. Come on. There we go. So chain has been extended to a new tip. So if we check that now, then suddenly that money has disappeared. So where is it now? Well, if we query the original wallet, right? Query UTXO, the payment address that we created just a while ago, then suddenly we have a new UTXO here. Obviously, it's gonna be hard to tell now because we haven't checked, but just know that this is the new UTXO that we unlocked. If you notice that the amount is not exactly 5, that's because some of that amount was used to pay for the fees, right? And so, but to summarize, that's pretty much how you would interact with Cardano, right? You just have inputs and then you create new outputs from that input, right? And it could be that the input, instead of coming from your wallet, it comes from a smart contract. And basically, this is money that anyone can potentially unlock as long as they satisfy the logic of that contract. And it could be, and it might be right now that it's kind of hard to think about what kind of use cases you can build on top of this. But we do know that in the industry that there are complicated applications that has been built on top of this, which are dexes or loan applications or treasuries or vesting applications, right? That you can build on top of the UTXO model. So finally, obviously, that wasn't code. That was just pure CLI, right? And so I will not demo this anymore. We're lacking time, but just know that those same concepts can be applied to a programmatic approach where you just simply use libraries. You still generate a wallet, you will connect to a back end here, but not directly to a Cardano node, because at this level, it is a different protocol, right? That was a Unix socket, and obviously, for example, in the web, you would interact with HTTP or WebSockets instead, right? But you still generate a key, and then you still build a TX, and you just still pay for unlock transactions, and you still sign, and you still submit, right? And within the ecosystem, there's a lot of um, different kinds of off-chain libraries and services. For example, in this case, there's something called Kopu and Ogmios, and if you combine that, it is a provider for this library. It's called Kopmios. They just combine the name, and if you use that, then that's how you can retrieve UTXOs, for example, right? And obviously there's a library for JavaScript, for Python, and other languages, C Sharp, for example. And I'm sure, like, if you do have, or I think there is also one for Java, I believe. I'm just not too familiar with that side. And so
Yeah,
now
on the Java, I'm creating, we have separate project running actually for the Java. So we are creating some of these libraries for Java actually.
oh, that's
So
really
that's
nice.
in progress.
That's really nice. That's good to hear. That's good to
Yeah.
hear. So but
Maybe Clark, I just go for ask a few of the questions. We take kind of pause. So the first question, like, or first maybe the clarification for everyone that you use the icon as a language, but in the Demeter can be used with Plutus or Haskell as well. So that way, the Demeter is not just dependent on, or not that it can be only used with the icon programming language. It can be used also with the Plutus and Haskell. Is that correct?
yes, that's correct, because again, what Demeter provides is access to services, to
To the
Cardano,
node, basically. Yeah,
to the
yeah,
node, yeah,
yeah.
and it doesn't impose the language or tools you will be using on top of that. You can use whatever, and you just have access to the node so that you don't have to download the node.
Correct, correct. Okay, so that's just for everyone to understand that. Now, the
Yeah.
second part, which is kind of question that you use the word fee, right? And you know, to executing any transaction, there is a fee is kind of calculated and deducted.
Yes.
Now, from the developer's perspective, when they're using Demeter,
Mhm.
uh, what they need? Do they need ADA, or how they compensate to them? Because understanding here is that Demeter is providing the node. That means running a node is a cost.
Mhm.
Now, is there any fee for developers, or I understood is free? So how do you sustain, or how that work, this fee model basically for
Oh,
the
so
developer's point of view?
yeah, so maybe Rodrigo can answer that better than me. But basically, Demeter has just a simple pricing model. I would say you would just go here, and then you there's a fee, but limited subscription. And then, if you, for example, if you do need more than what the free provides, then you have the capability to upgrade to a plan depending on your needs. Most likely, if you're just developing, then that is just free. When I say fees, I don't mean fees for using Demeter. Actually, it is the fee for using the blockchain. So Demeter
Yeah.
will not even get anything from that fee. This is because, in the blockchain, there's node executing your transactions, right? And these nodes spend money to keep their servers up and running 24/7, right? And so every time there's a transaction within the network, it just simply requires some fees to process that. And this is just encoded in the protocol itself. So you cannot bypass this, or no one is asking for this manually. There's no person that's saying, "Hey, I want this fee." Right? This is just encoded in the protocol, and when you send a transaction, there's a certain calculation that will be calculated, and then you will know, okay, this is the fee that I need to pay for that transaction. Hopefully that
So
makes.
no, understood. So one is that Demeter tool, if the user go beyond certain utilization, then Demeter may be charging some of the plan, right? So that's one
That's right.
understandable. But now going back to your this point that like the ecosystems, there is a automatic some fee deductions is there. That is
Mhm.
only applicable when I'm doing some real transaction, right? But if I'm doing developing testing, then it's okay. I don't need to have real ADA. Is that
That
correct?
That's correct. That's correct. So again, to recap that point, I'm sorry, maybe I skipped that part, right? So the Cardano has several networks. There is a mainnet, and the only time that you will spend real money is in mainnet, right? But if in the meantime, right, while you're still developing, you might not want to spend money, and obviously you might send a lot of test transactions. Then you would be fitting to use a testnet. So there's two testnets. Well, actually, there's three: the preview and the pre-production testnet. And there's another testnet that's related to governance, which is the SACHOnet. Which if you're not, you're not still playing with governance yet, then I don't recommend that. I just recommend the preview or the pre-production to just to test smart contracts, sending and receiving some assets and all that stuff. But again, yep, you don't pay for real money until you're ready to deploy to production, pretty much.
I think that's great. That's good clarification for everyone.
Great. Any other questions?
Yeah, so maybe Paul, me, you can let people unmute themselves. If anyone have question, please unmute yourself and ask your question. Hello? No, sorry, Clark, we don't hear you. So maybe you need to unmute yourself. Sorry.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Okay, sorry. I think when she changed the setting, you automatically got muted. So yeah,
Yes.
can
Can you
say
hear me
again?
now? Can
Yeah.
you hear me now? Yes. Okay. I was just saying that if you guys notice that in some of the SDKs, it requires certain backends. In this case, it requires two backends, Ogmios and Kopu, for example. And what Demeter does is actually provide those open source backends, so that instead of like setting it up on your own, you just click a few buttons and then suddenly you will be provided with these endpoints here for you. So you don't have to download anything. You don't have you only care about the logic of your transactions, of your smart contracts, and the rest will be taken care of, like the indexing, the access to the network from within Demeter. So hopefully that clears it up, what Cardano can do, the UTXO model, and also what Demeter provides for new developers, so that it will be an easier developer experience. So if you guys do have questions, go ahead.
You can unmute, guys, if anyone have question. I think now it's allowed to unmute. But meanwhile, maybe anyone preparing for the question, let me ask one more. I understand that, Clark, that TX5 have more tools than Demeter. Like Demeter is very maybe the fundamental basic tool which at the beginning the developers need. But you have also the other host of open source tools. Now, these services you mentioned, it's look like coupled with the Demeter, but other than Demeter, also any other tool you want to introduce, like just in few sentences?
Sure. I so if we go, so actually you should be able to see all the Demeter's, most of the Demeter projects, here. So in the TX5, I mean, sorry, the TX5 projects here in the TX5 IO website. So there's the Demeter, of course, that we just discussed now, but then there's a bunch of Rust-based tooling, which is Scrolls, which is another way to read data. Um, from the Cardano node, Aura. There's a Rust library that you can use, for example, to calculate fees, to understand the datum, to convert it from JSON to the seaboard that I showed you a while ago. So you could use this. For example, what I did was to wrap this Rust library into a .NET library, so that suddenly .NET can also understand Cardano. And so you could do the same for Java, for example, to wrap this Palace library. And then suddenly Java can understand CBOR, I mean Cardano CBOR at least, right? Or calculating transaction fees, or checking if a transaction is valid or not, for example, right? There's Dolos, and so Dolos is a Cardano node that is based on Rust, and some other projects. And obviously uh, some of the projects are not even listed here yet. But yeah, those are some of the projects that Demeter is working on. I mean, sorry, TX5 is working on.
Okay, okay, that's great. I think looks like um, not much question coming from anyone. Anyone question, or was it too much to digest today?
uh, I'm really sorry if that was too much, guys.
No, no, no. You don't need to be sorry, but like this is the intent to introduce, but in an introduction, and it's Friday evening. We kind of in India it's Friday evening, so we selected the perfect time for everyone.
Right.
uh,
Uh, in fact, like the plan was like to also introduce the SDKs, but it looks like we lack of time. So and obviously it's already a lot to digest. So, but yeah, hopefully most of that made sense, and hopefully it got you curious and got you started on how to develop on Cardano, right? But yeah, any questions would be appreciated.
Yeah, hi, this is Sanjay. So can you please mention some of the reference URL where some of the examples or from the basics things can is mentioned where we can correlate whatever you mentioned. Okay, so it can help us.
Okay, yeah, sure. So as I've mentioned earlier, a lot of things, a lot of the basic things, you that will help you understand, what I talked about just now would be to visit the developers.cardano.org. It spans from just understanding the basics, to using the Cardano or installing a Cardano node, for example, running Cardano node, and again, the one I just discussed, right, to create simple transactions and to the point that you can even become a stake pool operator if you want to, so that you can help create blocks or process transactions and earn by doing that. So all that information can be found here in the developers.cardano.org. I can send it in chat real quick. Give me a moment here. And then for smart contracts, I recommend going into the ICANN website, so that you can get started as well in terms of once you know the basics of creating transactions in Cardano, then you would just then study how to create basic smart contracts and then try it out. Try to send some funds to the contract and then try to unlock it. As an exercise to make sure that you really do understand and are familiar with how it works basically. So that would be a good resource for you.
Thank you so much.
Right?
Hi,
Any
hi
other
Clark.
questions?
Yeah, hi
Hello.
Clark. Yeah, this is Rajesh. Actually, I wanted to ask about the keys that you use to like create the hashes. And yes, yes, those keys, verification and signing keys. So, how when you transfer the transaction like from one account to another, like in the wallet, you are signing it with your key which you generated on your system. How would it verify? Like it's a asymmetric key or it's a symmetric key that you provide with the transaction to the owner that you are transferring to.
So the question is like how would it verify, right?
Yes, yes,
Um,
yes.
well, that's because that if we go back here in the UTXO discussion here, is that a UTXO specifies who the owner is of that UTXO, and the owner is an address that was generated using the verification key. It was derived from the verification key, right? So that
Hmm.
means that using the signing key, it can prove that it was the one that generated this and can sign transactions using that key. And so it then it can verify that, hey, yes, this user has the right to sign um, the transaction and prove that it owns a specific UTXO, for example.
Okay, got it, got it. Thank you so much.
Yes. To maybe to illustrate that further to everyone, right? So you have a payment V key, right? And then you can turn that into an address. It's just a file here, but really, if you check it, it's a string, right? it's encoded into something called the vector D2, but we don't have to discuss that. But just know that it was derived from this, right? And basically this is a key pair, right? So that this key here can then prove that yes, I do have so the S key can then prove that hey yes yeah, yeah, I did this is my pair that generated this address, right? So that means that then it can sign the TX using the S key, right? And then produce the signature. Uh, and then that signature will be then embedded into the transaction so that then the nodes can check yes, the owner did approve this transaction. Obviously I'm like trying to simplify this without any cryptographic terms to because that's out of my scope as well, but and just to make sure that everyone can relate as well, right? Hopefully that makes sense to everyone.
Yes, thank you.
Good questions, Sanjay, Rajesh. Good questions. Anyone else have any question? Okay. And maybe while we're wrapping up, anyone have question, please raise it. But is that's all from you, Clark, right? Or anything else you would like to communicate to the developers?
That's really pretty much it. But again, this I understand that this stuff are new concepts, and even I like a few years ago was also struggling to understand all this. And what helped me was really just to be to reach out with the community and talk to people that already know this stuff and learn from them. And that's how I even know about the X-Pipe now, because I reach out to the people that was involved with the X-Pipe and learn from them. And so I do encourage everyone to just really just ask questions, to connect with people within the community and just learn from them. And with it, and the community is pretty much a friendly community. They always answer questions, and very very happy to educate people, because again, one of the goals is to just make it so that the community has more developers, and so that they can bring new ideas right within the ecosystem. TX Pipe has a Discord, that occasionally a lot of people actually do ask questions there. So that would be a good um first first thing to reach out. You can go to the Discord of TX Pipe. Maybe we can send it to you, Oday, after
Yeah,
this conversation, so that people can go and join that Discord.
sure, Clark. So that's a lot of learning as we kind of see today in about an hour or so, and yes, a lot of information. And as we take it as an introduction, is not complete kind of the course per se, right? So with this introduction, possibly individuals can explore themselves and learn more from others, as you say. So with that, I would like to thank you, Clark, for your time, your this initiative to give this or do this knowledge sharing with this community. Thank you. Uh, Also, Rodrigo, I mean, thank you for taking your again time out as well, being present in this workshop and patiently, kind of listening to us. How we doing? What do you think? Hopefully, we did well. I think in an hour time. I mean, I think Clark went through all, and I know that kind of audience or the developers mostly a bit silent, but they're digesting information. Most of them are quite senior developers. But I think it will take some time. But if any comments from you, Rodrigo.
I think it's great. I hope everyone.
Thank you. On mute.
I think your volume is low, Rodri.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had my mic muted so I wouldn't bother Clark throughout the presentation. Yeah, I think it was great. I hope you enjoyed it. I think Clark did an awesome work as he does on a daily basis at our team. I just want to add one thing. So Demeter as a project was born to improve the developer experience in the Cardano ecosystem. So it should be very friendly to everyone who's making their first steps within Cardano. So I really encourage everyone to go ahead and register and try the tooling and the workspaces and the starter kits that are available there, because almost, if not every tool, it's accessible in a free tier mode, which is in fact sponsored by the Cardano Foundation. So yeah, I hope you can leverage Demeter and get started with your projects in the Cardano community. And thanks, Udai, for inviting us to this meetup.
Thank you, thank you. That's great, kind words, and I really appreciate TX Pipe's initiatives. The way they purely and primarily working on open source. So that means they're building for the community, and that's kind of primary reason I reached to. I think Rodrigo, what's the name? Sorry, Federico, and he kind enough to kind of guide me to you guys, and as you put, there's really developer friendly team TX5. So I feel that we are on the right path, that we reached to at this beginning to you guys. So great kind of the collaboration. Thank you very much. And I hope that some of the developers who take this journey forward will be in touch with you and join the Discord. Thank you also everyone who joined today, taken some time. I assume you will have good interest in Cardano, and there is a lot of opportunities here to learn and also deliver. So wish you all the best. Thank you. Thanks everyone, and have a good evening and good afternoon in Argentina, and kind of pretty much good night for Clark.
Yes.
So thank you everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye bye. Take care. Bye guys.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Palmi. You can stop possibly recording.